Hey guys, working into section 10.3 here, week 6 of our coronavirus virtual learning, and we're going to be recalling some things that we already know, right? Like, you remember how to solve this for x. You would just do the opposite of what's attached to it. -5 to both sides, right? That's it. How do you check it? You just plug it back in, right? 8 plus 5 equals 13. We're good. Okay? Skipping over to this one. How do you solve this one? Think about it a second. Do the opposite of the number that's not attached to the x. So the opposite of the number that's being added or subtracted would be to +7 to both sides. Hopefully this is all just like recall. -22 plus 7 is -15. Maybe use a calculator for that. And then you've got, of course, divide by the number next to the variable. And I get x equals 3. Now, I can plug that back in, and I would get -5 times 3 minus 7. Does that equal -22? What is -15 minus 7 equal -22? And if you have one of these calculators, you can just use your calculator option to do that. Or what I did is I downloaded this calculator. Okay, just went to my apps and look, it looks just like one of the graphing calculators from my classroom, which a lot of you got pretty accustomed to. So I just went -15 minus 7. And sure enough, -22, it checks out. So good, we're good. All right, so what do you think I would do then on this kind of a problem? Well, similar to this problem, I would still -5 first, just like I always do. And I get to here, and now that's not, if I read that, that is the square root of x equals 8. What number would you square root and you would get 8? It's 64, and that is the answer here. But the opposite of square rooting something is to square it. And if I do something to one side, I got to do it to the other side. Now what happens is squares and square roots cancel each other out. You get x. And 8 squared, well, that's 64. And now how do I check it? I plug it back in here. The square root of 64 plus 5 equals 13. And 8 plus 5 does indeed equal 13. So it works. 64 is my answer. Similarly, I would do the same steps here. I would add 7 first. -5 square root of x equals -15. I would divide by -5. You can see these are the same steps we always would do. It's just in the very end, I square both sides to get an answer of 9. Now again, can I plug that back in? -5 times the square root of 9 is -5 times 3, which is -15, minus 7 gives me -22. It works, okay? Now, what you're going to find sometimes is something called extraneous solutions. You'll go all the way through solving these problems and you'll get your answers, and when you plug it back in, it doesn't work. Those are called extraneous solutions, and there is a reason for it. Okay? We'll get to that here in just a second. Let's start working through some of these problems, like this first one. Okay? All the steps are just like what I did back here. I'm going to actually show you on the back side. We're going to write those steps down. Okay, I already have them first. But the first step is to do the opposite of the number that's being added or subtracted to the square root to both sides. So let's look for something that's being, that's being multiplied by it. That's being added or subtracted to it. So we do the opposite of that first, -3. Just like we did in a problem like this, we did the opposite of what's being added or subtracted to it first. So I do that opposite to both sides. I get 4 square roots of x plus 2 equals 16. Okay. Then the next step, well, do the opposite of the number that's attached to it by both sides. So you need to divide by the number if there is a number attached to it on the outside here. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. Those cancel. Right, I'm going to get square root of x plus 2 equals 4. And then from there, well, the third step, square both sides. And that's what I was showing you when I was doing this, squaring both sides. Because squaring both sides gets rid of a square root. So if I square this side, those go away. And what's written here, x plus 2, comes down. But again, if I square one side, got to do the other side too. And 4 squared means 4 times 4, which is 16. Okay? Then, it's just a matter of, the last step, is to redo steps 1 and 2 if necessary. Right? Do the opposite of what's being added, subtracted, do the opposite of divide. But you can see right away, hopefully, what to do next here, which is just to subtract 2 to both sides. And you get x equals 18. Okay? I shouldn't have even circled that because I should check it first, right? So 4 times the square root of 18 plus 2 plus 3 equals 19. Now I'm okay with you doing this check in your head, okay? On the homework, there's actually spots for the check, and some of you are going to do this way faster than what I'm doing it, and that's okay too, okay? I feel like right off the bat I got it wrong, and I did, because 16 minus 2 is not 18, it's 14. Yeah, just seeing if you're paying attention, okay? Alright, so I'll plug 14 in here, okay? Alright, 14 plus 2 is 16, and the square root of 16 is 4. So really, I've got this. And I get to here, and I can see that sure enough, 16 plus 3 equals 19. So it works. So now I can circle my 14. 18 wouldn't have worked. So yeah, I'm glad I kind of caught that. Okay. All right, let's look at the next one here. What's being added or subtracted first? This 1 is being added or subtracted. So let's get rid of that. Even though it's on the right side, that's okay. I see the square root. I do the opposite of what's being added or subtracted. I see the square root. I do the opposite of what's being added or subtracted. So those will cancel. Here I get negative 5 equals the square root of 4x plus 9. Okay. Now, there's no number being multiplied or divided here. There's no number in front. So I can kind of skip that step and go right to squaring both sides. When I square this side, they cancel. 4x plus 9. When I square this side, this means negative 5 times negative 5. That's what negative 5 squared means, which is 25. Okay? Minus 9 to both sides, right? We get rid of that number next to the variable first, and then we divide both sides. So I get 4 to equal x. Now before I circle it, I should probably check this. Negative 6 equals the square root of 4 times 4 plus 9 minus 1, which is 16 plus 9, which is 25. And does negative 6 equal 5 minus 1? No! It's 4. Which means that doesn't work and there's no solution. And that's what happens when you plug them in and they don't work. But guess what? We could have stopped ourselves so much work. Because the square root of 9 equals 3, right? The square root of 81 equals 9. The square root of a negative 9, try that in your calculator. It's going to say domain error or some kind of restrictions error. Because you can't square root a negative. And you can't square root a number and get a negative. So anytime I have square root of a number equals a negative, I could have stopped right there and said no solution. Right away. I don't even have to show all the rest of this work. Because I know I'm never going to get the square root to equal a negative number. Okay. Now I went through the process and solved it. And then in my check I saw that as well. Okay. So let's have you maybe pause it. Try the next two problems. Okay. I'm going to kind of fire through them fast. To show you how it works, but just check your answers, okay? Do the opposite of what's being added or subtracted. We did a number like this up top. Divide by that. And right here I see a square root equals a negative. I know that means no solution. I know that, okay? But I'm going to square both sides just to show you. X equals 25, right? These will cancel. Negative 5 is 25. And 6 times the square root of 25 minus 13 does not equal negative 43 because that's 6 times 5, which is 30. And 30 minus 13, not so much negative 43. So that tells me no solution. But again, I could have stopped right here. Okay? All right, next problem. Again, opposite of add or subtract first. Divide. Square both sides. Opposite of what's being added or subtracted again. And then divide to get x equals 14. Okay, I'm going to plug that in now to double check. 3 times 14 minus 6 plus 2, does that give me 20? 3 times 14 is 42, minus 6 is 36. And the square root of that is 6. Does that equal 20? Sorry, that's a 2 out here. That's a 2. Okay, and 18 plus 2 equals 20. Sure enough, it does. So 14 works. It's my answer. We can move on. And it's still the same steps on the next side. It says do opposite of what's being added or subtracted to both sides. Then do opposite of what's being attached to it. Then square both sides. Then redo steps 1 and 2. Well, when I look at each of these problems, there's nothing to add or subtract to both sides. There's nothing to times or divide to both sides. It happens with all 3 of these types of questions. So we can go right to step 3 and just square both sides. I'm going to do it here too. I'm going to do it here too. Okay? Alright, so what happens here is those cancel and those cancel, and I get x plus 4 equals 2x minus 1. And this goes all the way back to the first stuff we learned in chapter 1. You would bring x to one side, number to the other side, and go. So I'm going to bring my 1x to both sides. Remember, that's a 1. Those will cancel. 4 equals 1x minus 1. Add 1 to both sides. 5 equals x. Right? 1x, x, same thing. I would just be dividing by 1. Go and plug that back in. I get square root of 5 plus 4 equals the square root of 2 times 5 minus 1. Again, we're plugging it into both x's. This is the square root of 9. This is the square root of 10 minus 1, which is the square root of 9, and you get 3 equals 3. And it does work, so boom, good to go. Okay? Next problem. Okay? I'm going to square both sides, and they cancel to give me 3x plus 4. I'm going to square both sides, and those cancel to give me x plus 6. Again, I'm going to minus x from both sides. This time I'm doing it from the right, just so you see it's not always have to be the same. And most of you know exactly what to do from these kind of problems. X equals 1. Go back and plug it in. I get square root of 3 times 1 plus 4 equals the square root of 1 plus 6. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 4 is the square root of 7. Over here I get square root of 7. Even though I can't do the square root of 7, I know that the square root of 7 equals the square root of 7. So x equals 1 is good to go. Sorry, that should say x equals 1. Alright. Let's try this one down here. Now there's not anything on your homework like this. This is really just so you just can see how this works. So if you are checked out, turn it off, go to do the homework. Okay? But check out, what about this one? When I square both sides, those cancel, I get x plus 6. When I square this side, well, I get x squared. And this goes back a ways where we had to do some factoring, and it's all sorts of stuff from earlier this year. But if I bring this all to one side, I can solve a quadratic equation by bringing everything to one side, like those are opposites so they cancel, and you get x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. And really this was like x box from here, if you remember. Trying to figure out, or maybe it's just the box method. Which one was it? Let's see. No, this is x box. So I'd put negative 6 here, I put negative 1 here, I'd put x squared here and negative 6 here, and I figure out the numbers that multiply to give me negative 6 and will add to give me negative 1, and that's negative 3 and positive 2, right? So I will put negative 3x here and 2x here, and then I do the x box, x, negative 3x, remember going this way and then going this way to get 2. So I get x minus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0, and then you set each of those equal to 0. This goes back a ways, but we have done this. Add 3 to get x equals 3, subtract 2 to get x equals negative 2, and then I go back and check, right? So if I plug x into both of those, I get 3 equals the square root of 3 plus 6. Does 3 equal the square root of 9? Yes. Cool. That one works. When I plug in negative 2, I get negative 2 equals the square root of negative 2 plus 6. And I know that already doesn't work because I'm never going to square root and get a negative. Keep trying to say that. But even if I do this, the square root of 4 is 2, and that does not equal negative 2. So that one doesn't work, and it is just positive 3. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. This is your homework. Again, as you are looking through this, okay, definitely look at the examples I gave you, right? Like those first 6 problems are just like the 4 problems that we did on the first side of the notes. The last 3 problems are just like the last 3 problems we did on this side of the notes. Okay? Use them, please. Not much longer, folks. I know the sun is out. It's starting to get nice. Try and fight through it. Get a little more done. Have a good one.